Kirk to Rayborn, report. I'm required to make a security confirmation. When I call my ship, if you list your personnel, cargo requirements, any special needs.
There are television shows that entertain. Then there are television shows that disturb, provoke, and genuinely unsettle the people watching them. Star Trek has always walked that line, and for most of its history, it walked it brilliantly. Gene Roddenberry built this franchise on the idea that science fiction could do more than tell exciting stories about starships and alien worlds. It could hold up a mirror to society. It could make audiences confront things they would rather look away from. And sometimes, it could go so far in that direction that the people responsible for putting it on television simply refused to let it air. That is exactly what happened with several episodes across the franchise's long history. Not because they were bad television. In many cases, the opposite is true. They were pulled, restricted, or quietly shelved because they were too intense, too graphic, too emotionally raw, or because they touched on social issues that certain broadcasters were not yet willing to bring into people's living rooms. The BBC in particular made the decision multiple times to leave Star Trek episodes off the air entirely, citing content that they deemed too brutal or disturbing for general audiences. What makes these bans fascinating is that they reveal just as much about the era they happened in as they do about the episodes themselves. Looking back at them today, some of the reasoning seems almost quaint. Others still carry a genuine edge that you can feel the moment the episode begins. So let's go through 3 Star Trek episodes that are still considered banned, or at least were for a very long time, and examine exactly why each one crossed the line. The original series episode Miri opens like a classic mystery. The USS Enterprise picks up a distress signal originating from a planet that, impossibly, appears to be an exact duplicate of Earth. When Captain Kirk leads a landing party to the surface, they find a world frozen somewhere around the mid-20th century. Buildings stand empty. Streets are silent. Whatever civilization existed here has vanished without obvious explanation. The eerie quiet doesn't last. Within minutes, a horribly disfigured adult stumbles out of the shadows, attacks the crew with animal ferocity, convulses violently, and dies. It is a shocking opening, even by modern standards. The crew then encounters a young girl named Miri, who is terrified of them. She calls them grups, her corrupted version of the word grown-ups, and she treats their arrival as a death sentence. She explains that she and a scattered group of other children are the only survivors on the planet. They call themselves the Onlys. Here is where the episode moves from unsettling into something genuinely dark. The landing party notices strange bruise-like lesions forming on their own skin. Miri confirms what they already fear. These marks are the first symptom of a plague that has wiped out every adult on the planet. Once the marks appear, the victim has very little time left. The disease brings on madness first, then rapid physical deterioration, then death. Investigating an abandoned medical laboratory, the crew pieces together the full picture. Scientists on this duplicate Earth had developed a life extension program, one that worked almost too well. The virus they engineered extended human life dramatically, but with a catastrophic side effect. It remained dormant through childhood, only activating once the body reached biological maturity. The children scattered across this dead planet are not what they appear. Many of them are hundreds of years old, aging at an almost imperceptible rate, still trapped emotionally and mentally at whatever age they were when the plague first hit. McCoy races to find a cure while the rest of the crew tries to manage an increasingly dangerous situation. An older boy named John, jealous of Miri's attention toward Kirk and resentful of the adults on principle, organizes the other children against them. He steals their communicators, cutting them off from the Enterprise and making the situation exponentially worse. Eventually, the mob of children corners Kirk and physically attacks him. He is bleeding, outnumbered, and trying desperately to reach them with reason rather than force. The moment he finally gets through to them, reminding them that the youngest children will die without the older ones to protect them, is genuinely moving. McCoy tests the vaccine on himself in a moment of reckless heroism. It works, and the crew is saved. When this episode first aired on the BBC in 1970, it drew complaints almost immediately. The combination of diseased adults, child mob violence, and the unsettling concept of children, who are centuries old but emotionally stunted, was too much for many viewers. The BBC pulled it from rotation and left it out of reruns for years. The episode's darkness is not accidental. It is deliberate, thoughtful storytelling, but it was clearly more than some audiences were prepared for. Of all the episodes on this list, Plato's Stepchildren is the one that made history in the most direct and undeniable way. It contains what is widely recognized as the first interracial kiss in American primetime television, shared between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura. That single moment, lasting only a few seconds, generated a cultural shockwave that is still discussed more than 50 years later. The setup involves the Enterprise crew encountering a civilization that has modeled itself entirely on ancient Greek philosophy and culture. This society, known as the Platonians, possesses extraordinary telekinetic abilities, allowing them to control the physical actions of anyone around them. When Kirk and Uhura are brought before the ruling class, they are used essentially as entertainment, forced against their will to act out scenarios for the amusement of their captors. The kiss happens under these conditions. Neither Kirk nor Uhura chooses it. They are being physically compelled by the Platonians' mental powers. This framing was a deliberate strategy by the writers. By making the moment involuntary, they hoped to slip it past network censors, who might otherwise have killed the scene entirely. NBC executives were not opposed to the scene on principle, but they were deeply nervous about affiliate stations in the American South refusing to air the episode at all. As it turned out, the audience reaction was far more measured than the network feared. Formal complaints were surprisingly few. The reaction in the United Kingdom was a different story. When the BBC eventually acquired the series, they chose not to broadcast this episode at all. Their stated reason was that the content was too brutal overall. The episode does contain scenes of humiliation and psychological torment beyond the kiss itself, but many observers have long believed the real concern was the interracial element and the potential backlash from more conservative segments of the audience. Whatever the true reasoning, the BBC's decision meant that British viewers were denied the episode entirely. Looking back at it now, the episode is flawed in certain ways. The Platonians are cartoonishly cruel, and the plot has some uneven stretches, but the historical significance of what it accomplished is beyond dispute. The moment between Kirk and Uhura was a statement, and everyone on both sides of the debate understood it as such. Whom Gods Destroy is the most psychologically intense of the 3 episodes discussed here, and in many ways the most unsettling. Where Miri disturbs through its concept and Plato's Stepchildren through its social boldness, this episode disturbs through raw, unrelenting darkness about the nature of madness and the cruelty that can emerge from it. The premise begins simply. The Enterprise makes a routine supply run to Elba 2, a remote facility that serves as a maximum security asylum for the Federation's most dangerous criminally insane patients. It should be a brief stop. It becomes a nightmare almost immediately. The patients have taken over the facility. Their leader is Garth of Azar, a man who was once one of the most celebrated officers in Starfleet history. Garth's tactical genius was legendary. His victories were studied at the Academy. He was, by any measure, a hero. What transformed him into something monstrous is left somewhat ambiguous. A catastrophic injury, an experimental healing process that went wrong, a mind simply unable to hold itself together under pressure. The details matter less than the result. The man who greets Kirk and Spock when they arrive is not the legend from the history books. He is someone who believes, with absolute and terrifying conviction, that he is destined to rule the entire galaxy. Garth has also acquired an ability that makes him extraordinarily dangerous. He can alter his physical appearance to impersonate anyone he chooses. He uses this ability repeatedly throughout the episode, pretending to be the facility's chief medical officer, later impersonating Kirk himself. The psychological chess game between Garth and the Enterprise officers is the engine that drives the story forward, and it is deeply uncomfortable to watch. Garth is not a villain who wants money or power in any conventional sense. He is a man whose sense of reality has collapsed entirely, and he is brilliant enough to weaponize that collapse. The episode's most jarring moment comes when Garth casually kills one of the other patients, not because she poses any threat to him, but simply to demonstrate his power and break Kirk's spirit. The casualness of it is more disturbing than any elaborate horror could be. It communicates something true about a certain kind of dangerous person, the act of cruelty as a performance, meant to show the audience what the performer is capable of. The climax involves Garth using his shape-shifting ability to impersonate Kirk, forcing Spock into an impossible situation. He must identify the real Kirk without any physical evidence to go on. The solution, a code word that only the real Kirk would know, is clever, but what lingers is not the resolution. It is the hour of psychological torment that preceded it. The BBC determined that this episode was too disturbing for its broadcast standards, citing the combination of madness, torture, and sudden violence. It joined several other original series episodes that were either aired once and pulled, or simply never broadcast in the UK at all. It would be easy to look at these 3 episodes and conclude that the broadcasters who banned them were simply overcautious, perhaps even cowardly. And in some cases, that criticism is fair. Refusing to air Plato's Stepchildren because of an interracial kiss says far more about institutional timidity than it does about the content of the episode. But there's another way to read these bans, and it is ultimately more interesting. These episodes were banned because they worked. They created exactly the discomfort, the provocation, and the emotional impact they were designed to create. Miri disturbs because childhood innocence and centuries of slow, stunted aging is a genuinely horrifying concept. Plato's Stepchildren provoked because equality and human dignity are ideas that have never been universally accepted without a fight. Whom Gods Destroy unsettles because it portrays madness not as something exotic and distant, but as something that can happen to the most capable and celebrated among us. Star Trek, at its best, was never safe television. It was television that dared to go to places that other shows avoided, to ask questions that other shows would not pose, and to show audiences things they might prefer not to see. The bans were, in a strange way, a form of acknowledgement. They confirmed that the episodes had done exactly what Gene Roddenberry always intended his show to do. They had gotten under the skin of the people watching, and that, more than any award or ratings figure, is the lasting legacy of the stories that were considered too bold to air. That's a wrap on 3 of Star Trek's most controversial and restricted episodes. If this kind of deep dive into television history is your thing, like and subscribe so you never miss the next one.